Story 1. I'm not sure if it's true, but during my physiology lecture, the professor said his educated guess was ultra-long distance swimming because higher body fat provides better buoyancy. He suggested that in such events this could allow women to perform better. Story 2. I shot rifle in college. It was a co-ed sport, and I was routinely beaten by both female and male competitors. I was not very good, but the point is that women were competitive with men. Story 3. Women compete on roughly equal terms with men in Olympic shooting sports. Women hold some of the records. Story 4. In high school shooting competitions, our men's A squad was consistently outperformed by the women's A squad. We held mixed events with men and women competing together, and some parents of the male shooters complained that it was unfair for their sons to compete against women. Story 5. It wasn't long ago that top women could compete with top men in curling. Then more money entered the sport. The men gave up beer and cigarettes and began strength training, which made the game less interesting to watch. It was more fun when it was creative and based on finesse. Strength is more important now, so men tend to dominate. Story 6. Long-distance hiker. She holds the record for the fastest known time on the Appalachian Trail for a woman. Story 7. I think men slightly outperform women in rock climbing, but women compete at nearly the same level as men and in some areas have advantages. Story 8. Something makes me think the user who responded, "That is great," to a post with the headline, "No Congress committees being run by women," does not have good intentions. Story 9. Ultramarathon research. Winners of the Moab 240. Open water long distance swimming. Gymnastics, specifically balance beam and floor routines. Women set the standard. Horse riding. Story 10. I scrolled far to see if anyone mentioned darts. I am not referring to bar darts. I am referring to the highest level of darts. There is no strength difference to consider. It requires concentration, consistency, and the ability to do mental arithmetic on the fly. Story 11. Women generally have a lower center of gravity, which is advantageous in sports such as gymnastics and ice skating. In some endurance events, such as ultramarathons, women's energy partitioning can be an advantage. Some argue that women can succeed in certain team sports because they are socialized to work more easily in teams, but teamwork is a skill that anyone can learn. Story 12. In high school, I did archery through the National Archery in the Schools program. I think that is why national teams had to be half girls and half boys. In competitions, fifth-place girls were almost always ahead of first-place boys, which I thought was ridiculous. Story 13. Women have an advantage in very long-distance swimming. Story 14. Research indicates that women may have an advantage in endurance events such as ultramarathons. At shorter distances, the greater strength of the average man is advantageous. In much longer events, performance depends more on the body's ability to endure and manage energy, and women are believed to have the advantage. This has not yet been clearly demonstrated in competition results because ultrarunning is a niche sport with relatively low female participation, so clear trends are difficult to detect. However, current research points in this direction. Story 15. Endurance. Now we need to encourage more women to compete in endurance events. This year at the Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc, for example, out of 2,700 starters, only about 300 were women, but 3 women finished in the top 20. I am not saying women must want to do endurance events, but if we can get a higher percentage competing, I think we might start winning these races. When I say competing, I mean truly aiming to be competitive. There has been a significant increase in women taking part socially and recreationally, which is great to see. If I can motivate a few more to try the competitive side, that would be excellent. Story 16. Shooting. I am not sure why I am getting downvoted. During the Olympics, women's shooting technique appeared very focused. They used patience and controlled breathing as major strengths. I believe that if more women joined the sport, they could consistently outperform men in this area. The sport is not currently geared toward women. Story 17. I think there is confusion about the question. If you mean sports where women significantly outperform men on average, or where women almost always beat men at the elite level, the answer is essentially no sports. If you mean sports where women can compete with men on relatively equal terms or slightly better, there are examples such as long-distance running and gymnastics. Story 18. Equestrian events are one of the few sports where men and women compete directly. High-level jumpers are about 60% men. Rider weight, within reason, does not appear to play a large role. Female jockeys are about 1 in 20, although more women work as exercise riders. Making weight is harder for women. Despite being naturally smaller, men are generally stronger pound for pound. A 110-pound woman cannot exert the same forces on a horse as a 110-pound man in most cases. Success in both disciplines is largely determined by the horse, but strength, balance, technique, and endurance are all required of the riders. Story 19. Women have won championships in every professional category of National Hot Rod Association drag racing. This includes Top Fuel, which produces about 11,000 horsepower and can accelerate to 340 miles per hour in less than 4 seconds. Women have been heavily involved in the sport for decades. The sport emphasizes reaction time and courage more than physical strength, so men do not have a physical advantage. Story 20. Stationary shooting with a light firearm, such as bench shooting, can favor steadiness. On average, women tend to have steadier hands and less physiological tremor, which may relate to lower muscle mass and slower metabolism. A female shooter with equivalent experience, training, and skill can outperform a male shooter from a bench. In some high-end competitions, the rifle's intrinsic accuracy may mask this difference. With a more precise rifle and a smaller target, the female shooter's advantage is more likely to be apparent. Story 21. Women do better in some sports mentioned because many more women participate than men, for example, horse riding or synchronized swimming. One sport where women have been scientifically shown to have an advantage is ultramarathon running. After extremely long distances, women seem to have an advantage over men for reasons not fully understood. Many theories have been proposed, but there is no consensus. I suspect this may also apply to certain other ultra-endurance sports, possibly swimming. Overall, men have a physical advantage in most sports, but that does not mean the goal should be to level the playing field between the sexes. I enjoy both men's and women's tennis, but I do not think the goal should be to mix the two or to prove that men and women have the same potential. Story 22. When shooting rifles, an untrained woman will be a better shot than an untrained man 90% of the time. Story 23. The women are close to the men in ultra-distance running. Story 24. Long-distance running. Edited to add, very long-distance running, the 150-kilometer ones. Story 25. Ultra-distance running and swimming. Story 26. Rachel Blackmore is a female jump jockey. She rides for one of the best trainers, and I would rank her among the top 10 current national hunt jockeys. Story 27. I can say for sure that the United States women's soccer team can beat the men's team. Story 28. All the sports in which height, wingspan, or leg span, and muscle mass do not matter. Story 29. Naginata is similar to kendo, which uses swords, but it employs a polearm-style weapon. It was once taught mainly to women in the Japanese physical education curriculum, but more men are becoming involved. Although large-scale tournaments are less common in some countries, women often outperform men. Using the hips for propulsion is essential to good technique, but in the early stages many men tend to rely on strength. Many of the older, experienced sensei are women, in my opinion, which helps explain why women continue to outmatch men for a while, though men are beginning to catch up. Story 30. They have a slight advantage in shooting. They generally have larger hip bones, which can be used to rest the elbow and keep their aim steady. Story 31. Women perform slightly better than men in very long ultramarathons. Story 32. Cheerleading is also one of the most dangerous sports. Story 33. There are YouTube videos of male gymnasts attempting women's gymnastics routines, and they often fail in humorous ways. Story 34. Women's figure skating exists only because men were upset about routinely being trounced in competitions, so the events were separated. Story 35. In skydiving, gender is irrelevant in competition, especially at the highest levels. Being very muscular is actually a disadvantage. Flexibility, core strength, and overall body awareness are far more important than brute strength. It is mostly a mental game. Story 36. I feel it is important to mention that sports and their rules are social constructs, and much of what we value in athleticism is specifically catered to men. Story 37. Stand-up paddleboarding is easier with a lower center of gravity. It allows men and women to compete without a significant advantage for either. Story 38. Gymnastics. The beam. Why? Because if a man slips and falls, it could cause severe injury, possibly rendering him infertile or even causing death. Story 39. I think women can beat men in sports that require minimal physical effort, for example shooting, curling, bowling, and chess. In traditional high physical effort sports such as boxing, mixed martial arts, skiing, or javelin throwing, I do not see a chance. Story 40. Some activities that may favor women include aquatic sports, horseback riding, and aerobic disciplines. Others mention archery and shooting, events where weight, flexibility, or finesse matter are often well suited, as are certain endurance sports and forms of rock climbing that emphasize technique over brute strength. Just as men have advantages in some events, women have advantages in others. Although opportunities for women in athletics have improved, it may take generations for cultural acceptance to change and for more women to feel comfortable pursuing certain activities. It is naive to assume that discouragement does not occur in high school and college. Saying women are free to participate does not fully explain why they may be underrepresented in the fields mentioned. Story 41. Women have an advantage in long-distance endurance sports and in sports that rely on flexibility. Occasionally, they also have an advantage in sports where petite athletes have the edge. Some sports are female-dominated, so women often come out on top because far more women participate. Story 42. Courtney Dauwalter won the Badwater Ultramarathon. Ultramarathons cover very long distances, and results are not always consistent. This is a clue. Story 43. First, define sport. There are competitions and there are sports. Competitions, such as archery, darts, or billiards, have little or no element of athleticism, and women should be able to compete on equal footing. Sports that require athleticism, such as track, basketball, soccer, and tennis, are different. Women have little chance in direct competition with men because of physiological differences. A female basketball player can be much more skillful than a male player, and when it comes to shooting, female players often are better. But in direct physical competition, they would be unlikely to get a shot off against a man. Story 44. I read this and pictured sports where men get beaten up. Story 45. In most ultra-endurance events, basic exercise science shows that women thrive in higher repetition ranges and steady-state exercise. Men often outperform in explosive activities but fatigue faster and require longer rest between efforts. Story 46. Maybe not consistently, but in ultra-endurance events, the longer the distance, the more level the playing field becomes. In some cases, the overall winner of a very long race has been a woman, for example, Courtney Dauwalter. Story 47. Equestrian sports. Half of your team is a horse, which is a great leveler. Story 48. A team of untrained average men recently defeated the Brighton women's football team 9-0. Story 49. Ultra-running and ultra-swimming are often said to be great equalizers. Many reasons are suggested. Estrogen's anti-catabolic effects, higher body fat and the ability to mobilize it, and differences in pain threshold. I have not followed ultra-running closely for a while, but some female competitors are mind-blowingly tough. When women describe their races, it is often a list of disasters: broken toe, period, food poisoning, even being clinically dead for 12 minutes, followed by a shrug that next year will be better and they will get a faster time. When men win, interviews often focus on how the stars aligned and they had the perfect race. Just an exaggerated observation. My brief foray into ultra-running was humbling. I remember wondering if I could continue through the pain. I had a toe taped at the medical tent, and a woman came in for the same treatment, constantly trying to reassure me. When she took off her shoe for the medic, her foot looked like she had stood on a landmine. All 5 toes twice as bad as my one injury, the sole purple with bruising, and the ankle swollen like a grapefruit. I felt very embarrassed and stopped thinking I was tough. She also beat me by a long margin. My thought is that maybe they are just tougher than men, rather than it being only the physical attributes often suggested. Anyone who has witnessed childbirth would probably agree. Story 50. Just a reminder that 2012 was the first time all countries participating in the Olympics actually fielded or allowed female athletes. In most countries, women were barred from professional sports because leagues were overwhelmingly for men and therefore there was no legal way for women to compete. This persisted until the second half of the 20th century. Even after the creation of women's professional leagues, funding, research, and promotion have remained severely limited compared with men's sports. Most female professional athletes today still have to work part-time jobs to make ends meet because they are not paid enough. Medical research into the effects of different environments and substances on the female body is very limited, and there is little equipment developed specifically for women's physiologies. Comparing male and female peak performances in sports without accounting for these disparities is misleading. It would be like comparing an heir raised with an army of elite tutors to a scrappy child from the slums who taught themselves to read despite repeated beatings and bullying. Would you expect athletes from established nations with rigorous routines, exacting nutrition, and state-of-the-art equipment to compete on the same level as athletes from impoverished nations with no access to time, resources, or information? Now, when underdogs win, we call it a miracle or a heroic achievement. If you want to compare male and female athletic limits, first ensure all other parameters are equal. Otherwise, the comparison is meaningless. Story 51. In ultramarathons, the longer the distance, the greater the advantage for women. Story 52. Many people think childbirth is a sporting event. I want to see it in the Olympics with qualifying rounds. Story 53. In ultramarathons longer than 120 miles, although the overall winner is usually a man, the average woman records a faster time than the average man. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.